I've lived so long in the Netherlands that sometimes when I speak in the United States, I'm congratulated on speaking English so well. I'm afraid my American accent has somehow been slightly Dutchified. I hope that doesn't become obvious in this lecture. The opening of my lecture has just been given unexpectedly by Father Damien. I was going to talk about Dorothy and Adi's long-standing connection with this abbey. I wonder if it wasn't for Adi Bethune if the Catholic worker would have enjoyed such wide circulation to this day. I brought along a copy of the latest issue of the Catholic Worker, and I just want to show you what it looked like when it was published on the 1st of May 1933. Not a very attractive cover, we have to admit. I mean, one wouldn't, for aesthetic reasons, rush to obtain a copy. But with Adi Bethune, a completely new spirit that sort of blended traditional iconography, Romanesque art, with contemporary sensibility, entered the pages of the Catholic Worker. And I think had a lot to do with its reaching so many people, not all of whom were all that literate. Dorothy Day used to say if you could not read the Catholic Worker, you could understand what it was all about just by looking at the illustrations, most of which were by Adi Bethune, especially in the early 20, 30 years of the publication. By the way, I have a few extra copies of this if you want to just ask for it. I think it's appropriate that we are, in the context of a conference on Catholicism and the American experience, including Dorothy Day, who was, among other things, an intensely American woman. This was true before she became a Catholic, became even more true afterward. Peter Steinfeld was telling me this morning that being at a meeting with Dorothy Day where somebody complained about the American flag being in the room, and Dorothy responded by saying it was the most ridiculous comment she'd ever heard. She felt very comfortable with being in the same room with an American flag and wasn't thrilled to be criticized for allowing it to be present. All right, on to the lecture. Can you think of a word that describes a person who devoted much of her life in being with people, many of whom we would cross the street to avoid? Who for half a century did her best to make sure that they didn't go hungry or freeze to death on winter nights? Who went to Mass every day until her legs couldn't take her that far, and at which point communion was brought to her. Who prayed every day for friend and enemy alike, and whose prayers, some are convinced, had miraculous results. Who went to confession every week. Who was devoted to the Rosary. Who lived in community with the down and out for nearly half a century. Whose main goal in life was to follow Christ and to see Him in the people around her. Well, I would propose as a one-word answer, saint. Can you think of a word that describes a person who refused to pay taxes, didn't salute the flag, never voted, went to prison time and again for protests against war and social injustice, who spoke in a plain and often rude way about our way of life, who complained the church wasn't paying enough attention to its own teaching, and who on occasion compared some of his pastors to blowfish. In a word, a troublemaker. And there you have Dorothy in 2 words, saint and troublemaker. Most saints lived in the distant past, that is before we were born, and have been presented to us most of the time with all blemishes removed. We are not surprised to learn that Saint Wonderbread of the North Pole, daughter of pious parents, had her first vision when she was 4, joined the Order of the Holy Pallbearers at the age of 11, founded 47 convents, received the stigmata when she was 55, and then when she died 20 years later, not only was her cell filled with divine light, but the nuns attending her clearly heard the angelic choir. That's hagiography. It presents Saint Wonderbread as only 1% less perfect than the Virgin Mary. But what about the actual Saint Wonderbread? What the hagiographer failed to mention is that she ran away from home, had a voice that could split rocks, and a temper that could melt them back together again. that she experienced more dark nights of the soul than celestial visions, that she was accused of heresy by her bishop and narrowly escaped being burned at the stake. And though she lived long enough to be vindicated, felt like a failure on her deathbed. That all these wrinkles were ironed out after she died. Who needs facts that might dull or dent the halo? If Dorothy Day is ever canonized, the record of who she was, what she was like, what she did, is too complete and too accessible for her to be hidden in wedding cake icing. She will be the patron saint not only of homeless people and those who try to assist them, but also people who lose their temper. She may have been a saint, but Dorothy Day was not without rough edges. To someone who told her she was too hot-headed, she replied, "I hold more temper in 1 minute than you will hold in your entire life." At Notre Dame, to a college student who asked a sarcastic question about a recipe for soup, said, "Miss Day, you've been talking a lot about soup. What is your recipe for soup?" And her answer was, "You cut the vegetables until your fingers would bleed." Rather, I'm sure that student still remembers that encounter. To a journalist who told her it was the first time he ever interviewed a saint, she replied, "Don't call me a saint. I don't want to be dismissed that easily." On the other hand, as she said time and time again, we are all called to be saints. She didn't believe that saints have different DNA than anyone else. Sanctity is merely loving God and loving your neighbor. It is not that hard. Sanctity shouldn't be something for a special class of people. It should be, and indeed is, something ordinary. The scandal is not being a saint. I was 19 years old when I first met Dorothy Day. She was an ancient, that is to say, 62-year-old person. That is 9 years younger than I am today. This means that for more than half a century, she's been encouraging and scolding me on a daily basis. The mere fact of having died in 1980 doesn't seem to get in the way. I met her at the Catholic Worker Farm on Staten Island. In those days, you still had to get out there by ferry boat and then take a bus. This ferry boat was the only link to Manhattan. I found her sitting with several other people at the battered table where the community had its meals. Before her was a pot of tea, a few cups, none of them matching, and a pile of letters that I had been charged to deliver from St. Joseph's House in Manhattan. The Catholic worker received a great deal of mail every day, much of it for Dorothy, and every now and then a letter for Doris Day. Some of these actually were for Doris Day. We had to send them via her agent to Hollywood. Dorothy often read the letters aloud, as she did that day. She would read the letter and then tell a story or two about the person who had written it. It was the Dorothy Day University in full swing, though I didn't realize it at the time. She wrote countless letters and notes in response every year. But some letters she gave to others in the community to answer either because a personal reply wasn't needed or because she wanted to connect the correspondent with a particular person on staff. A good part of Dorothy's life was spent reading and writing letters. Even her monthly column on pilgrimage was usually nothing more than a long letter. If she's ever canonized, she will be among the patron saints of letter writers. People sometimes think of her as the personification of the simple life, but in reality her days tend to be busy, complicated, and stressful. Often she was away traveling, visiting her daughter and grandchildren, visiting other Catholic worker communities, speaking at colleges, seminaries, local parishes, getting around by bus or donated car on its last park bus. As some of you will bear witness, as there are people in this room who have met her on more than one occasion. Before an audience, Dorothy had a direct, unpremeditated, story-centered way of speaking, no notes, no rhetorical polish, a manner that communicated a certain shyness, but at the same time, wisdom, conviction, directness, modesty, faith, and courage. She was never the kind of speaker who makes those whom she is addressing feel stupid or without possibilities. Her basic message was stunningly simple. We are called by God to love one another as He loves us. Love one another. No exceptions. One of the ways we love each other is by practicing hospitality. For Dorothy, a house without what she called a Christ room was incomplete, and a parish without a Christ house was also incomplete. For Dorothy, hospitality is simply practicing God's hospitality to us with those around us. Christ is in the stranger. Christ is in the person who has nowhere to go and no one to welcome him or her. Those who cannot see Christ in the face of the poor, she said, are atheists indeed. I'm sure Pope Francis would agree. And her words are similar to those of St. John Chrysostom, one of the great voices of 4th century Christianity, who said over and over again in various ways, if you fail to recognize Christ in the beggar at the church door, you will not find him in the chalice. Judging by the Synoptic Gospels, the Last Judgment was not a topic Christ frequently addressed during his several years leading up to his execution. The one place in the New Testament where he would hear him speaking in detail about who is saved and who isn't occurs in the 25th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel. You all know the text. Welcome into the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of all ages, because I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was naked and you clothed me. I was homeless and you took me in. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. I tell you solemnly, what you did for the least person, you did to me. And what you failed to do to the least person, you failed to do to me. It's an astonishing text. It turns out that we are not saved because we excelled in theology or were clever or received great honors or wrote books about sanctity or never got into trouble and never made mistakes. We are saved because we attempted to be channels of God's love and mercy. Period. What is the role of the church in all that? Well, it's an enormous role. It's to prepare us to live a life in which God's mercy is channeled through the sacraments, through the calendar, through the parade of saints the church presents to us on a daily basis to remind us that sanctity is possible, and there's no end of models of sanctity, through a confessional life. Because we're bound to stumble, sometimes fall flat on our faces, and we need help in getting up again, to renew our experience of God's mercy. The corporal works of mercy were also at the very center of Dorothy's life, and that sometimes got her into trouble. Corporal works of mercy, but also the spiritual works of mercy, admonishing the sinner, instructing the ignorant, counseling the doubtful, comforting the sorrowful, bearing wrongs patiently, forgiving all injuries, praying for the living and for the dead. Dorothy helped us understand that a life of hospitality has many levels. There is hunger not only for food, but also for faith. Not only for a place at the table, but for a real welcome. Not only for assistance, but also for listening. Not only for words said as if recited from a script, but for kind words, caring words. There is not only hospitality of the door, but hospitality of the face and the heart. Hospitality of the heart transforms the way we see people and how we respond to them. Their needs become important to us. Now, Dorothy Day lived a remarkable life. I spent hours and hours telling stories about it. I would tell a few. To start at the beginning, she was born in New York and spent much of her adult life there. In 1916, when she was 18 years old, she was hired as a journalist by The Call, a radical New York daily newspaper. Next, she was on the staff of a radical monthly called The Masses, the only publication in American history to have been closed by the government because it failed to support World War I and indeed opposed it. During the war, she trained as a nurse at a Brooklyn hospital and worked 12-hour shifts during the great influenza epidemic. She was close to many artists and writers, including Eugene O'Neill. She used to hang out in the Greenwich Village saloon, locally known as the Hellhole, or more politely as the Golden Swan. Just around the corner, apparently it doesn't exist anymore, from St. Joseph's Church, where she often went inside to pray, even though she wasn't sure what was leading her to do so. She was far from being a Catholic at the time. It was an adventurous time in her life, but a life without much of an anchor. She had a lover who wanted neither marriage nor children. In a desperate effort to preserve their ill-fated relationship, she had an abortion. Her lover abandoned her anyway. Dark times. She tried to commit suicide, but thank God a neighbor smelled the gas and saved her life. By the time of her conversion to Catholic Christianity in 1927, when she was 30, she had experienced and survived a great deal. By then, thanks to money from the sale of film rights for a novel she had written, she bought a beach house on Staten Island, a small dwelling heated by a cast iron stove in which she burned driftwood. She wrote a gardening column for the Staten Island Advance, the newspaper I later worked for. It was in that small house that with a lover foster Botterham, she once again conceived a child. This time she was determined not to cut short her pregnancy, which she saw as nothing less than a first-class, capital M miracle. She thought she'd been made barren by her abortion. As her belly swelled, she was filled with longing that she and her child would cross the border into the Catholic Church. As a young mother-to-be walking on the beach or going to the post office, rosary in hand, a rosary, by the way, that was given to her by a sympathetic communist. Rosary in hand, she prayed her way through her out-of-wedlock pregnancy, prayed her way through the Baltimore Catechism, prayed her way through the collapse of her relationship with Tamar, her daughter's father, prayed her way through Tamar's Catholic baptism, prayed her way to her own baptism, prayed her way through the incomprehension of her atheist friends who regarded all religion as snake oil, prayed her way through a great deal of loneliness. It's not a chance that her autobiography is entitled The Long Loneliness. If baptism was the turning point in her life, the second was an event that came 6 years later, a prayer, a desperate appeal to God that she made in the crypt of the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. on the 8th of December, 1932, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. As she writes in The Long Loneliness, there I offered up a special prayer, a prayer that came with tears and anguish, that some way would open up for me to use what talents I possessed for my fellow workers, for the poor. Occasionally prayers are answered quickly. The very next day, Dorothy met Peter Moore, an immigrant from France who was something of a modern-day St. Francis. It was Peter's proposal that Dorothy found and edit a newspaper to make better known papal teachings on the social order and encourage its readers to build, as Peter put it, a new society within the shell of the old, a society in which it is easier for people to be good. Dorothy came from a family of journalists. Her father was a journalist. She had been a journalist. Her brothers were journalists. She took to the idea like a duck to water, finding something that should have been obvious became absolutely clear. The first issue of the Catholic Worker was distributed 5 months later, the 1st of May, 1933. And that December, the first House of Hospitality opened its doors, actually an apartment of hospitality just down the street on East 14th Street in Manhattan, dedicated to St. Teresa of Avila. By December, the paper's print run started at 2,500 on the 1st of May, 1933. By December, 100,000 copies. By that time, Hattie Bethune was giving the paper the kiss of a fine artist. Houses of hospitality were opening in other cities around the country. I think today there must be something like 200 of them. In 1961, when I arrived, St. Joseph's House of Hospitality was on Christie Street, a decrepit 3-story building a block from the Bowery, in those days the city's grimmest area, now very much amplified into the East Village. As there wasn't enough room inside, the down and out were often lined up at the door waiting their turn, either for a place at one of the 3 bench-like tables or for access to the clothing room on the next floor. In the period I was there, Dorothy's office at the Catholic Worker just inside the front door was hardly big enough for her desk. I served as managing editor for a time, and it was in that office that she and I would sometimes argue, I have to admit, occasionally discuss what would be in the next issue. I was much too big for my britches, as they say, lots of ideas. Fortunately, Dorothy was able to persuade. She would have made a fine abbess, it's been remarked. It could get very noisy in that little office. It wasn't the easiest place for conversation. The food was being served, meals were being prepared in the space adjacent to the office. From morning till night, it tended to be a loud place. Sitting at her desk one afternoon talking about the next issue, we could hardly hear each other. I can remember Dorothy getting up on one occasion, opening her office door and yelling, "Holy silence!" And indeed, for a minute or two, there was almost quiet. It wasn't a comfortable life. At the time I joined, Dorothy had a 6th floor, $25 a month, cold water flat in a tenement on Spring Street. 2 small rooms, bathtub next to the kitchen sink, tin top that you could raise and lower. There was a toilet in the hallway, half the size of a room closet. This may sound uninviting, but Dorothy regarded her neighborhood as a kind of luxury in itself. There was this Italian bakery directly across the street. The smell of bread in the oven was often in the air, and there was always the Italian cooking, the intoxicating perfume of Italian food, meals being prepared. The San Gennaro Festival was celebrated annually just around the corner. For a week, that part of Manhattan, as many of you know, becomes part of the neighborhood in Naples. When climbing those 5 flights of stairs finally became too much for Dorothy and her aging knees, we moved her to a similar apartment on Ridge Street, which was only 1 flight up, also $25 a month, but in a seedier neighborhood. The place was in appalling condition. 2 of us went down to clean and paint the 2 rooms, dragging out box after box of linoleum and layers of wallpaper, etc., etc. Among the debris we dragged out was a hideous painting of the Holy Fountain. Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, rendered in a few bright colors in a battleship gray background, done on a piece of plywood. We shook our heads before depositing it in the trash along the curb. Not long after, Dorothy arrived carrying this primitive icon. Look what I found. The Holy Fountain. It's a providential sign. She put it on the mantle of the apartment's bricked-up fireplace. It's an example of Dorothy's talent for finding beauty where others, in this case Jim Forrest, for example, who has since written a book on praying with icons, only saw rubbish. If Dorothy was one of the freest, least fear-driven persons I have ever known, she was also one of the most disciplined. This was, I think, most notable in her religious life. Whether traveling or at home, it was a rare day when Dorothy failed to get to Mass, On Saturday evenings, of course, she went to confession. Sacramental life was at the very bedrock of her existence. She never obliged anyone to follow her example, but God knows she gave an example. When I think of her, the first image that comes to mind is Dorothy on her knees, praying before the Blessed Sacrament, either in one of the several parishes in walking distance of the Catholic worker, or at the Catholic worker farm where Cardinal Spellman had very kindly permitted us to have a chapel and the reserved sacrament in it. One day, Dorothy was called away by an emergency phone call, and I couldn't help but poke into the prayer books that she had with her at the front of the little chapel at the farm to see what were these papers that she was looking at so attentively in her prayers. Nosy young journalist. And I found page after page of names of people who had asked her prayers, including a list of people who had committed suicide. I once asked her, how could prayers for somebody who already died have any meaning? And she always said, as to me as she did to many others, and wrote in her columns, with God there is no time. Our prayers are always relevant. Occasionally she spoke about the importance of prayer. We feed the hungry, yes. She once explained, we try to shelter the homeless and give them clothes, but there is strong faith at work. We pray. If an outsider who comes to visit us doesn't pay attention to our praying and what that means, he'll miss the whole point. She was attentive to fast days and fast seasons. It was in that connection she told me a story about prayer. For many years, she said, she'd been a heavy smoker. Her day began by lighting up a cigarette. Her big sacrifice every Lent was giving up smoking. But having to get by without a cigarette made her increasingly irritable as the days passed, so that the entire staff of the Catholic Order would be praying that she would resume smoking. One day as Lent approached, the priest who ordinarily heard her confessions told Dorothy, please, don't give up smoking this year. Instead, he proposed a daily prayer. Dear God, help me to stop smoking. Dorothy told me she used that prayer for a number of years, I don't know how many. Had no impact at all on her addiction as far as she could tell. Then one morning she said she woke up, reached for a cigarette, and realized she didn't want it and never smoked another. Moral? Persistence pays. And God knows Dorothy was persistent about just about everything she undertook. People sometimes tell me how lucky I am to have been part of a community led by Dorothy Day. They seem to imagine a group of more or less saintly people having a wonderful time doing good works. In reality, Catholic worker community life in Manhattan in the early 60s had much in common with purgatory, as described by Dante. The staff was made up of people with very different backgrounds, interests, temperaments, and convictions, some quite pious, some on the borderline between Catholic and ex-Catholic. We ranged from the gregarious to the permanently furious. Agreement among us was as rare as visits by the President of the United States. The most bitter dispute I experienced had to do with how best to use the small amounts of eggs, butter, and other rarities that were sometimes donated to us. Should we use them for the line? That is to say, the nameless people, by and large, who would wait in the street for their turn to come in and eat some food, one of the 3 meals reserved per day. Or the family, that is, the people who might once have been on the line years before, but gradually had become part of the household. It had been the custom to save the treats for the family. Though we worked side by side, saw each other daily, prayed together, staff tension had become too acute for staff meetings. Dorothy, or the office manager, Charlie Butterworth, somehow made his way from Harvard Law School to the Catholic worker, handed out the jobs. And once you had a job, it was yours until you stopped doing The final authority was Dorothy Day, not a responsibility she wanted or enjoyed, but no one else could make a final decision that would be respected by the entire staff. Tom Cornell remarked to me, one of the other former editors of the Catholic Worker, Tom Cornell remarked that Dorothy Day was well suited to anarchism so long as she could be the anarch. Benedictine said she would have made an excellent abbess. In this case, Dorothy returned from a cross-country speaking trip, found the dispute in progress, and told the two people running the kitchen that the butter and eggs should once again go to the family. This led to the two resigning from kitchen work and soon after leaving the community trailing clouds of black smoke, convinced that the actual Dorothy Day wasn't living up to the writings of Dorothy Day. There had been this kind of war of quotations from Dorothy on the bulletin board of the community, where one person would find a column in which she said we should be ready to roll up newspapers and sleep on the floor to make room for those who need a bed. Another, which she would say, well, in fact, we have to admit our limitations. Sometimes there are things we simply cannot do. So we, like hand grenades, being thrown back these quotations from Dorothy Day. We do the same thing, of course, with the New Testament, with the Bible. One of the miracles of Dorothy's life is that she remained part of what was often a conflict-torn community for half a century. Still more remarkable, she remained a person of hope and gratitude to the end. How often I can recall Dorothy using the phrase, the duty of hope. Even though the Archdiocese of New York has launched a process in Rome for the formal recognition of Dorothy as a saint, and Rome has given her subsequently the title Servant of God, Dorothy Day, Dorothy was and remains a controversial lady. There was hardly anything she did that didn't attract criticism, and the criticism still lingers. I was with Cardinal Dolan the other day, and he's given away so far, he estimates 150 copies of my biography of Dorothy, which is the only cardinal I have is passing out my book. So if you want to get a book free of charge, just go and see the cardinal. We were talking about how in Dorothy Day there's something to irritate almost everyone. But there's also something in Dorothy Day to inspire anyone at all. Inspire and challenge. Even hospitality sometimes scandalizes people. We were blamed for making people worse, not better, because we were doing nothing to reform them. The social worker asked Dorothy one day how long the down and out were permitted to stay. We let them stay forever, Dorothy answered rather testily. We live with them, they die with us, and we give them a Christian burial. We pray for them after they are dead. Once they are taken in, they become members of the family. Or, rather, they always were members of the family. They are our brothers and sisters in Christ. I remember one day, a lady walking into the Catholic worker, and Dorothy happened to be there. She recognized her. She had come to make a donation. In this case, it was a donation of a diamond ring. And Dorothy thanked the lady for it with just about as much effusion as she would if the lady brought a bag of old clothes, slipped the ring into her pocket, and that was the end of that encounter. But not too long afterward, one of our least favorite, I don't know how to describe her, we called her the Weasel. And she ventured into the Catholic worker to get a bag of food or two, or some clothes, or whatever it was she needed, some money. And of course, we did our best to meet her needs. The word thank you never crossed her lips, nor any indication she was thinking about saying those words. It was rather flinty encounters. She came in that day, the Weasel came in, and Dorothy reached in her pocket and handed her the diamond ring. I think it was me who asked Dorothy afterward whether it wouldn't have been a better idea to go up West 47th Street to the diamond exchange and sell the diamond, and then we would have no problems paying the woman's rent, we paid her rent, and providing for some other people's needs in the process. And Dorothy's response was very curt. She said, "Do you think diamonds were made by God only for the rich?" Of course, what got Dorothy into the most hot water was her social criticism. She pointed out that nationalism was a more powerful force in most people's life than the gospel. That's not just an American problem, this is a world problem, it's a human problem. It's true everywhere. Nationalism a more powerful force in most people's lives than the gospel. While she hated every kind of tyranny and never ceased to be thankful for America for having taken in so many people fleeing poverty, repression, conscription. She was fierce in her criticism of capitalism and consumerism. She said America had a tendency to treat people like Kleenex, use them and throw them away. She had no kind words for war or anything having to do with it. For Dorothy, war was simply murder wrapped in flags. She reminded us that the total number of people killed by Jesus is 0. Same for the apostles. She was convinced Jesus had disarmed all his followers when he said to Peter, "Put away the sword, for whoever lives by the sword will perish by the sword." A way of life based on hospitality and love, including love of enemies, left no room, as far as she was concerned, for killing. You couldn't practice the works of mercy and healing with one hand and the works of violence and destruction with the other. You couldn't give drink to the thirsty on Monday and bomb the waterworks on Tuesday. One must battle evil, as so many saints' lives demonstrate, only by non-violent means. Even the best of wars, she insisted, is a disaster. She was no stranger to prison. She was first locked up as a young woman protesting with suffragettes in front of the White House in 1917 when she was 19 years old. She was last jailed in 1975 for picketing with striking farm workers on the edge of a brick field in California. She took pride in the young people of the Catholic worker who went to prison rather than to be drafted. Being in prison, she pointed out, referring once again to the works of mercy, being in prison is a good way to visit the prisoner. But she also welcomed back others who had left the Catholic worker communities to fight in the Second World War. They might disagree about the best way of fighting Nazism, but the door was wide open for those who wished to return. Dorothy was sometimes, indeed often, criticized for being too conservative a Catholic. How could she be so radical about social matters and so conservative about her church? While she occasionally deplored statements or actions by members of the hierarchy and once picketed the New York Chancery office in support of a strike by Catholic gravediggers, she was by no means an opponent of bishops or someone campaigning for dogmatic changes in the church. What was needed, she said, wasn't new doctrine, but our living the existing doctrine. True, some pastors barely seemed Christian, but one had to aim for their conversion, an event which would not be hastened by berating them, but rather by helping them see their vocation requires more than they have yet given. And the way to do that was to set an example. I didn't become a Catholic, she told Robert Coles. I didn't become a Catholic to purify the church. I knew someone years ago who kept telling me that if you Catholic workers could purify the church, then she would convert. I thought she was teasing me when she first said that, but after a while I realized she meant what she was saying. Finally, I told her I wasn't trying to reform the church or take sides on all the issues the church was involved in. I was trying to be a loyal servant of the church Jesus had founded. She thought I was being facetious. She reminded me that I had been critical of capitalism in America, so why not Catholicism in Rome? My answer was I had no reason to criticize Catholicism as a religion, or Rome as the place where the Vatican is located. As for Catholics all over the world, including members of the church, they are no better than lots of their worst critics, and maybe some of us Catholics are worse than our worst critics. Pleased as she was when the liturgy was translated into English, she didn't take kindly to smudging the border between the sacred and the mundane. When a priest close to our community used a coffee cup for a chalice at Mass celebrated in the soup kitchen, she afterward took the cup, kissed it, and buried it in the backyard. It was no longer suited for coffee. It had held the blood of Christ. I learned more about the Eucharist that day than I had learned from any book or sermon. It was a learning experience as well for the priest who ever after used a chalice. It It was my privilege to give him that chalice. I was up at Mount Savior Monastery, and after this event occurred, and Brother Thomas, a great potter, renowned potter, became aware of what had happened, and he gave a beautiful chalice and pen, which I was able to bring back and give to this particular priest. And as far as I know, he uses it to this day. Dorothy's sensitivity for the sacred helps to explain her love, rare at times, of the Orthodox Church, a section of community famous or infamous for its reluctance to modernize, rationalize, speed up, streamline its liturgical life. There's a light-changing, a bulb light-changing joke. You joke, how many Methodists does it take to change a light bulb? Catholics, etc. One is, how many Orthodox does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is, change. There's another answer also. Light bulb? Dorothy longed for the reunion of the church. She occasionally took me to meetings of a small group in New York City, a group called The Third Hour, formed by Helena Zwolsky, a good friend of Dorothy's. Russian had become a Christian and a Roman Catholic Christian through the Benedictines in France. He moved to New York because of Hitler. And eventually taught at Seton Hall and Fordham. So I went to this Third Hour meeting with Dorothy. I remember some people who at the time even then as a young person, just barely knew about. Alexander Schmemann, a very renowned Orthodox theologian. Nikolai Kerensky, the last prime minister of Russia before the coup by Lenin. W.H. Gordon was there. In a little living room in an apartment in Midtown Manhattan. Dorothy felt very drawn to a dialogue that embraced East and West in Christianity, actively engaged in it. And it was Dorothy who brought me to visit the Russian Orthodox Cathedral on East 97th Street. And there she introduced me to a priest serving there, and his name was Father Matvey Stadnia, Father Matthew. Father Matvey was later appointed Dean of the Epiphany Cathedral in Moscow, the Patriarch's Cathedral in the Soviet time. It was in 1988 that I saw Father Matvey again. But of course, I didn't remember his name at all, and I didn't make any connection between the almost faceless priest I met with Dorothy in Manhattan many years earlier, 25 years earlier perhaps, and this particular priest. It was Father Matvey who launched the first project of Christian volunteer hospital service, the Works of Mercy, in what was still Soviet Russia, something that had not happened since the time of Lenin. And Dorothy there was to discover was part of the reemergence of the Church and Works of Mercy in Russia in the late days of the Soviet Union. I went to interview Father Matvey in an office of the Patriarch's residence, the Arbat district at that time. And at the end of the meeting, I said, I have a gift for you. I don't know if you'll have time to read it, but if you do, I think you'll see it's an appropriate gift. It's a biography of Dorothy Day. He looked at the cover of the book and looked at me again and said, Dorothy Day, did you know her? And then he looked more closely at my face. He said, I knew you when you were a young man. When Dorothy brought you to our church. Hard to be an atheist in the experiences of God's providence. I'm not sure what had given Dorothy such a warmth for Orthodox Christianity, but one of the factors was certainly her love for the books of Dostoevsky. Most of all, his novel, The Brothers Karamazov. Perhaps the most important chapter for Dorothy concerned a conversation between a wealthy woman and an elderly monk, Father Zosima. Probably you remember it. The woman asks him how she can be certain that God exists. Father Zosima tells her that no explanation or argument can possibly achieve this, only the practice of what he called active love. There is no other way, he assures her, to know the reality of God The woman confesses that sometimes she dreams about a life of loving service to others. She thinks perhaps she might become a nun, live in holy poverty, serve the poor in the humblest way. It seems to her such a wonderful thought. It makes tears come to her eyes. But then it crosses her mind how ungrateful some of the people she's serving might be. Some will complain that the soup she is serving isn't thick enough, the bread isn't fresh enough, the bed too hard, the cover's too thin. She doubts she could bear such ingratitude, and so her dreams about serving others vanish, and once again she finds herself wondering if there really is a God. To this, Father Zosima responds with the words that Dorothy again and again recited by heart. Love in practice is often a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams. So important to Dorothy's spiritual development as a young woman, reading this book in her father's home, still in her teens, the first time she read it, that I think it had a great deal to do with her eventually becoming a Christian and indeed a Catholic Christian. And I think sometimes of Dostoevsky as, in his own quiet way, one of the co-founders of the Catholic work. Dorothy was a great reader, often quoted from the books she read, but some of the books she read over and over again. One of the books she quoted from, for example, was George Bernanos' novel, The Diary of a Country Priest. And the sentence you were most likely to hear from it, hell is not to love anymore. Hell is not to love anymore. And she also quoted St. Catherine of Siena, much the same lines. After all, St. Catherine was, from Peter Martin's point of view, the saint that Dorothy most resembled. And St. Catherine had said, all the way to heaven is heaven, because he said, I am the way. Perhaps Dorothy Day's main achievement is that she taught us the little way of love. It was chiefly through the writings of St. Therese of Lisieux that Dorothy had been drawn to the little way. No term in her mind better described the ideal Christian way of doing things. As she once put it, paperwork, cleaning the house, dealing with the innumerable visitors who come all through the day, answering the phone, keeping patience and acting intelligently, which is to find some meaning in all that happens. These things, too, are the works of peace, and often seem like a very little way. And again, she remarked it as in the living from day to day, taking no thought for the morrow, seeing Christ in all who come to us, and trying literally to follow the gospel that resulted in this work. I'm sometimes asked, Dorothy Day gives a fine example for people who don't have a family to take care of, mortgages to pay, but what about the rest of us? The rest of us includes me and my wife. We have 6 children and at Lake County 8 grandchildren. We have too much and give too little. But in my own life, every time I have thought about the challenges of life in the bright light of the gospel, rather than the gray light of money or the dim light of politics, Dorothy's example has had its influence. Every time I try to overcome meanness or selfishness rising up at me, it's partly thanks to her example. Every time I defeat the impulse to buy something I can get along without, Dorothy Day's example of voluntary poverty has renewed impact. Every time I give something away I can get along without, every time I manage to see Christ's presence in the face of a stranger, there again I owe a debt to Dorothy Day. Every time I take part in efforts to prevent war or end them, or join in campaigns to make the world a less cruel place, it's in part thanks to Dorothy Day. What I know of Christ, the church, sacramental life, the Bible, and truth-telling, I know in large measure thanks to her. Well, whatever I have done that was cowardly, opportunistic, or spiteful is despite her. She has even shaped my reading life. One could do worse than to get to know the authors whose books helped shape Dorothy's vocation and faith and sustained her until her death in 1980. It isn't that Dorothy is the point of reference, Christ is. But I can't think of anyone I've known whose Christ-centered life has done so much to help make it easier for me to tempt a Christ-centered life myself. She's dead 33 years. It seems more and more people are aware of her. This past Ash Wednesday, preaching in St. Peter's Basilica, Pope Benedict described Dorothy as a model of conversion, one of his last sermons before his retirement. Meeting with Cardinal Dolan a few days ago, he spoke of her as being a saint for our time. Writing in the Catholic Worker a few years ago, one of her grandchildren, Kate Hennessy, talked of the impact on her own life of the remarkable grandmother God had given her. To have known Dorothy means spending the rest of your life wondering what hit you. On the one hand, she has given so many of us a home, physically and spiritually. On the other hand, she has shaken our very foundations. I am among those many whose foundations were shaken. And I, too, am still wondering what hit me. Well, I was trying to think about a very question as I woke up this morning, because she was so outrageously American. I mean, I've lived for a large part of my life, more than half of it, in Europe. You can spot Americans without them opening their mouths or holding a flag. They just stand out. There's something about Americans, a confidence, an energy, a sense of response to the challenge of life that is somehow, in a very intangible way, American. You see it in the body posture, you see it in the way people use their hands, you see it in their eyes and faces. This is not to say anything critical about other people and other nationalities, it's just something peculiarly American. Dorothy had been states. I was thinking maybe she's something like John Brown minus the bloodshed, you know. Just a little bit, has a little bit of Henry David Thoreau, of course, in her. If the Boston Tea Party would happen to coincide with her life, she might have been among those on board. She felt such deep gratitude for America opening its arms to so many people. People that a lot of Americans didn't want to come, but were received, who suffered and endured, not least Catholic Christians. So I think no one felt more at home in America than Dorothy, even though she was a troublemaker. But then Americans are troublemakers. I mean, I got in trouble in the Navy. Out of my innocence, I was working at the Weather Bureau in Washington, D.C., and I was quite unhappy when I discovered that the weather predictions that my unit had given having to do with Cuba were ultimately didn't know at the time, but soon after I discovered they were being used for the invasion, the Bay of invasion. We were giving, you don't want to invade the country in bad weather like we had here last night. And I was ashamed of that as an American. And I read in the Washington Post that people were, from the Catholic Worker and a few other groups, having a silent prayerful vigil in front of the CIA building in downtown Washington. I went down and joined them wearing civilian clothes, of course. Imagine it simply because I was an American and I could protest. It's just the warp and woof of American identity. Well, I got into an enormous amount of trouble. That's what led to my discharge ultimately as a conscientious objector. I had no intention to be a conscientious objector. I was just waiting for my enlistment to be over, and then I would devote my life, I thought, to either monasticism or the works of mercy, or both somehow. But I think it was that kind of attitude. America is a place where protest is part of the life. And as long as it's done in a way that respects the other, it's made a positive contribution to the community. If you can love your adversary, it can make a transforming contribution. And so that was very central to Dorothy's attitude toward people that she met. in conversation. She often met people who radically disagreed with what they thought she believed or what she in fact did believe. And she never was contemptuous. She sometimes was brusque, but never looked down on the person who asked the question or made the comment. Again, I think that's very American, or should be. Has been, maybe less so today. No, not yet. Well, stand up so everybody can.
I'd like you to comment.
Can't hear you.
Okay, I'll turn around this way. Was that better?
No, the mic. Speak to the mic.
Mic doesn't work.
Mike is dead. Mike is dead. I'm not. So I'll try to speak up. In her biography, Long, in terms of the meaning of that title, she is very, very cryptic. She is very, very cryptic in terms of what that really means. And I've heard it explained and tried to understand it really the way. First of all, in the literal sense of loneliness. Secondly, in the sense of aloneness as distinguished from loneliness as stated by Henry Now. And the third sense would be the Augustine statement of not resting until I rest in thee, Lord. And I wonder if you would try to explain.
I think mostly it's the Augustine reading, although she certainly did know loneliness in every possible way in the course of her adult life. She knew it when her first lover abandoned her. She knew it when her later and much more affectionate relationship disintegrated because her would-be husband hated the church, hated religion in all its forms, but especially the Catholic Church. Would not endure anything having to do with the church and hated Dorothy's spiritual life and any form of practicing, having a crucifix on the wall, etc., etc. If you read her letters, and they've not been published, you see the anguished letters that she wrote to Foster Patterham for years after they separated, in which she pleaded with him to marry her. They're really quite remarkable letters. Or the love letters she wrote when they were still together. Some of the best love letters and the most touching love letters I've ever read. Eventually she embraced voluntary, not only voluntary poverty, but voluntary celibacy. It was never an easy choice for her. I think she considered the involuntary celibate as an alternative title for what better became the long loneliness. And then there is that loneliness that our hearts go to rest us until they rest in thee. Luckily, she was subject to dark nights of the soul in quite the way, for example, St. Teresa experienced, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Dorothy's friend. But she certainly knew inner loneliness, and just becoming a Catholic and living a spiritual life doesn't just magically wipe away that problem. Does that help? Ben?
Thank you so much.
I didn't say anything, but I am holding it